When I moved into Pinecrest Estates, I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for silence. After 12 years with the Tactical Reconnaissance Task Force, most of them spent in deserts, jungles, and places I still can't legally name, I wanted was a quiet street and a patch of sky that didn't need satellite clearance to admire. Pinecrest looked like the kind of place where people waved but didn't pry, and lawns were edged like military haircuts. I bought a small house at the end of Cypress Lane, right where the community met, the wilderness 1 foot in suburbia, the other in peace. That illusion lasted 6 days. Her name was Karen Whitmore, HOA president and walking embodiment of a C-letter, blonde highlights, sharp as razors, lips always painted to match the HOA logo, deep crimson, and an attitude that screamed courtroom drama villain. The first time we met, she didn't say hello. She said, "Is that thing staying here?" She was referring to my Jeep, a matte black military-issued Wrangler Recon, armored underneath and laced with gear even I couldn't modify without authorization. I parked it behind a locked side gate, fully within my property lines, and partially shielded by cypress trees. It wasn't an eyesore. It was efficient, tactical, necessary. It's task force property, I said, trying to keep it friendly. Still used for reserve ops, cleared by the county. Karen raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow like she was the one handing out clearance. "In Pinecrest," she said, "we like to keep things residential, normal." I didn't answer. I'd spoken to people like Karen before in foreign markets where bribes were currency, and every smile was a threat. I knew not to engage, not yet. But Karen wasn't the type to let silence win. The next morning, I found a bright yellow citation taped to my gate: "Unauthorized vehicle removed within 72 hours or face HOA penalties." It was printed in Comic Sans. That offended me more than the fine. I ignored it. The second note came 3 days later, bolder, this time final notice. The ink was red. Someone had underlined impoundment twice. Still, I ignored it. By the end of the week, I received 3 separate letters, one accusing me of violating community standards, another endangering neighborhood aesthetics, and a third suggesting my Jeep could be militarizing the atmosphere. Militarizing the atmosphere. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't, because something told me Karen wasn't just a bored busybody. She was a true believer, the kind of person who thought clipboards gave her divine right, and she had power, real power. The HOA board was just 5 members. 4 of them owed Karen favors. The 5th was her cousin. When I showed up to the monthly board meeting, folder in hand, citation letters stacked like case files, Karen introduced me as a concerned resident who's here to better understand the rules. I'd like to formally challenge the citations, I said. "This vehicle is exempt under federal and state law. I have the documentation." I passed the papers around. County clearance, DOD exemption, local sheriff's acknowledgement, all NOTARIZED. Karen took one look, blinked, and said, "This meeting isn't a courtroom, Mr. Matthews. We'll take your concerns under advisement." Then she turned to the next agenda item: hydrangea guidelines. "Are pink varieties too aggressive?" That was when I knew I wasn't dealing with misguided policy. I was dealing with control. I returned home that evening and mounted the exemption notice right beside my Jeep, behind the locked gate. I bolted it to the fence and covered it with a weatherproof case. If Karen wanted a war, I'd give her a paper trail so long it could strangle her bylaws. But a week passed without incident. No more letters, no more notes, no more meetings. I should have known better. One morning, overcast, quiet, the kind of day that makes you double-check shadows, I stepped outside with coffee in hand and paused. Mid-dash, sipped off the padlock on my gate was lying on the ground, split clean through, and my Jeep gone. No tire tracks, no engine noise in the night, just empty gravel where 2 tons of government steel had stood. My blood went cold, not from panic, but from clarity. A different kind of silence settled in, one I hadn't felt since Helmand Province, the kind before everything exploded. And in that silence, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Karen had just crossed the line, and she had no idea who she'd just declared war on. My first move wasn't to panic. I don't panic. Years of combat operations had trained that reflex out of me. What I did instead was simple. I set my coffee down, pulled my phone from my pocket, and opened the feed from my surveillance system. 3 minutes later, I had her, clear as day, captured from 2 angles. Karen Whitmore, HOA president and part-time criminal, standing in front of my gate with a bolt cutter and a clipboard like she was conducting an audit at Fort Bragg. She didn't just authorize the removal, she orchestrated it. The footage showed her instructing a tow truck driver, while waving her clipboard like a conductor's baton. She cut the lock herself, yanked the gate open, and even inspected the Jeep with a look of smug satisfaction before stepping aside to let the truck back in. It was surgical, illegal, but surgical. I saved the footage, pulled the timestamps, and backed everything up to a secure drive. Then I made my first call to Special Agent Kyle Brenner, my liaison at the Department of Defense. "Kyle, it's Matthews," I said. "I have a situation." "You still have the Recon Jeep?" he asked, his tone shifting. "No, Karen from the HOA just stole it." He didn't laugh. "Stay put. Sending someone Call number 2 went to Deputy Ruiz at the county sheriff's office. He was ex-Marine. We'd bonded over coffee and mutual disdain for bureaucratic nonsense. She what? He barked over the line. I have video, multiple angles, vehicles, task force property classified components still on board. Silence then, we're on our way. While I waited, I reviewed the surveillance footage again. The expressions, the audacity. Karen hadn't just cut a lock, she'd violated federal property, impersonated authority, and possibly triggered a national security breach. All to prove some absurd point about community uniformity. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. By the time the sheriff's SUV and the unmarked black government car pulled into my driveway, I had a file ready. Deputy Ruiz took one look at the footage and whistled. She didn't even try to hide her face. Agent Brenner's associate, a silent guy named Dalton, scanned the footage with military precision. Then he pulled a device from his coat, tapped a few keys, and nodded. The Jeep's active GPS pinged 10 minutes ago, he said. Local impound lot. Ruiz snapped his fingers. Let's go get it. 2 hours later, the Jeep was recovered, but untouched. The tow company owner was a jittery mess. Said Karen had shown him an HOA release form, signed in official-looking cursive and stamped with what turned out to be a fake seal she printed off the internet. She said the vehicle was abandoned and threatening property values. He mumbled, hands shaking. I swear I thought it was legal. Brenner's associate seized the form. Forgery, he said flatly. She's done. That's when things accelerated. Karen had no idea the Jeep still carried encrypted communications gear, even if dormant. The moment she authorized its removal, she triggered a chain reaction. By noon, federal documents were being drawn up. By 2 p.m., an arrest warrant had been issued for theft of federal property, destruction of private property, unlawful entry, impersonation of a government agent, and interference with military equipment. It was more than a list. It was a death sentence for her social standing, her power, her entire world. I stood on my porch as 2 black SUVs pulled up in front of a house. Karen was gardening roses, of course, clipped to unnatural perfection. She looked up, smiled politely, then froze when the agent stepped out. There's a specific moment when people realize they've gone too far. You can see it in their eyes, when denial turns to disbelief, and disbelief turns into dread. Karen hit all 3 stages in 5 seconds flat. What's this about? She asked, her voice tight. Agent Dalton handed her the warrant. She laughed too, loud. Is this a joke? This is about that Jeep. I was enforcing community policy. Ma'am, Dalton replied, voice calm but sharp. You tampered with, removed, and attempted to conceal a vehicle owned by a federal task force. That's not community policy. That's a federal offense. He cuffed her on the spot. The entire neighborhood watched from windows and porches. Some filmed, some whispered. Nobody intervened. The Queen of Pinecrest had been dethroned and the HOA was suddenly, violently aware that her crown wasn't real, that as they drove her away. I didn't smile, but I didn't blink either, because this wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was just the beginning. Karen's arrest sent shockwaves through Pinecrest Estates. Neighbors who once clutched their leashes and lowered their eyes when Karen walked past were now gossiping in clusters on sidewalks, by mailboxes, in online forums that lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. The Queen of Covenants, stripped of her clipboard, had become the neighborhood scandal. But for me, it wasn't over. Not even close. While Karen sat in custody, the Department of Defense escalated their investigation. My Jeep had been outfitted with passive surveillance modules, nothing mission-critical but enough to warrant classified access status. Tampering with that, especially without clearance, triggered more than local charges. It moved the case into federal jurisdiction. Karen was arraigned in county court, but it was just a pit stop. Her charges were quickly refiled at the federal level. At the preliminary hearing, she arrived in a beige suit looking like a ghost of her former self. Her usual theatrical confidence had vanished. No red lipstick, no smug glances. Just hollow eyes and trembling hands. The courtroom was packed and I was there front row. Her attorney, a stiff corporate type who probably thought he was defending a parking ticket, tried to paint it as a misunderstanding. My client believed she was enforcing local vehicle ordinances under her HOA authority. He said that the judge wasn't buying it. The defendant cut through a private lock and signed a forged impound release using a counterfeit seal. The judge read aloud, voice sharp as a gavel. The vehicle in question is federally owned. This is not a misunderstanding. This is criminal conduct. Karen didn't speak. She couldn't. The plea deal offered was severe but necessary. Fines, probation, a permanent criminal record, and immediate removal from all HOA-related duties. She took it. That should have ended things. But Pinecrest wasn't just watching, it was reacting. Residents who'd been quietly suffering under Karen's reign began stepping forward. Mr. Lin from down the street revealed she'd fined him for installing solar panels. The Whitakers shared how she made them repaint their home twice in 1 year for being too cheerful in tone. Even the neighborhood pastor admitted she'd once threatened to report his church van as a commercial vehicle parked overnight. The community was fed up. At the next emergency HOA meeting ironically held in Karen's absence, the board looked shaken. Only 4 members showed up, visibly anxious. I waited until public comments were allowed, then stepped up to the mic. "My name is Derek Matthews," I said. "You've met me, or fined me, or ignored me." A few chuckles from the back. "You allowed a woman with zero legal authority to weaponize HOA policy for personal control. She committed crimes, serious ones. But this board enabled her." Pause. Silence. Then I laid down a thick file on the table, a compiled report of Karen's citation history, legal overreach, and resident complaints. I handed copies to each board member. The room was still. "I'm formally calling for a vote to remove the current board and establish a new oversight structure, one with checks, transparency, limits." The motion posthumously, 2 weeks. Later I was elected to the newly formed Pinecrest HOA Oversight Council. I didn't want the power. I wanted accountability. My first order of business: repeal every bogus rule Karen had implemented under the guise of aesthetic cohesion. The Jeep, now freshly polished and parked proudly in my driveway, became a neighborhood symbol. Veterans started coming by. Families waved. Even the teens, once cautious of Karen's no loitering rule, began biking freely without fear of citations. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when I received an official apology letter from the Department of Defense, thanking me for protecting task force property and for my continued discretion and cooperation. Along with it came a small, unexpected bonus, a formal commendation, and permission to retain the Jeep for personal use under veteran protocols. Karen, on the other hand, put her house up for sale. The listing was vague, but we all knew why she was leaving. She couldn't walk her dog without someone snapping a photo, couldn't drive without seeing whispers in her rear view. Her power had vanished, and Pinecrest had woken up from its long, HO-induced slumber. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt balance. The community no longer feared its rules, they respected them, because for the first time the rules made sense. Still, I knew better than to believe peace was permanent, because, in places like this, power always finds a way to grow back, and, sometimes, it wears pearls and holds a clipboard. For a while, Pinecrest Estates was quieter than I'd ever seen it. Not the quiet of fear the kind Karen cultivated, but the quiet of release. People smiled more. Kids rode scooters without watching for fines. Flags flew again. Lawns still looked pristine, but now it was by choice, not coercion. Karen's reign was over, but her damage still lingered in the weeks after her departure. I uncovered just how deep her reach had gone. Dozens of homeowners came forward with stories: illegally issued fines, forged citations, threats of liens, and rule changes passed behind closed doors. The woman hadn't just overstepped, she'd rewritten the rules in her image. She treated the HOA like her personal throne, and the neighborhood like subjects meant to serve her vision. I made it my mission to fix that under the new council. We rewrote the bylaws from scratch. Every rule went under a microscope. Anything vague, petty, or rooted in Karen's need for dominance was slashed. In its place, we implemented measurable guidelines, resident voting rights, and mandatory transparency on all decisions. No more secret meetings, no more handwritten fines, and absolutely no more citations for unharmonious color tones. We also introduced something I insisted on: veteran recognition clauses. Anyone actively serving or honorably discharged would be granted reasonable accommodations. Flags, vehicles, uniforms, or service-related gear could not be restricted under any circumstance. No one objected. The residents voted unanimously to keep me on the board, but I declined the chair. I'd done my part. I wasn't here for politics, I was here for peace. Still, it didn't mean I couldn't enjoy the view. Every morning I took my coffee outside and sat beside the Jeep, now freshly detailed, newly plated, and legally protected by enough documentation to make a law professor cry. The new padlock on my gate was titanium core, laser engraved with one word: secured. But closure didn't arrive with policy. It arrived one Sunday afternoon, 6 months after the whole ordeal, when I spotted a familiar luxury sedan rolling slowly down Cypress Lane. I recognized it before I saw her. Karen, dressed in beige again, sunglasses large enough to swallow her face, hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wasn't here to return, just to look. She slowed as she neared my driveway. Her eyes flicked to the Jeep, then to the new community bulletin board that bore my name beneath Oversight Founders, then to me, sitting in my chair with a book in my hand and a half smile on my face. She didn't roll down her window, didn't wave, but her gaze lingered. Maybe she was trying to reclaim something. Dignity, maybe, control. But this wasn't her kingdom anymore, and I didn't flinch. After a few seconds, she pressed the gas and drifted away like a ghost, vanishing into daylight. That was the last I ever saw of her, but her name stayed. Not in reverence reform. Karen had become a cautionary tale, a lesson not just about abuse of power, but about what happens when people stop speaking up and start letting fear shape their lives. In her absence, Pinecrest found something it hadn't had in years. Community barbecues returned. So did porch nights. We built a playground. We even started a neighborhood watch, not because we were afraid, but because we cared. I helped organize a 4th of July block party that year. Someone brought sparklers. Someone else brought a giant sheet cake with the words, "Welcome back." freedom, and beneath it, a miniature model of a black Jeep, icing glazed and all. I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped my plate. By the end of that night, someone asked if I'd consider running the HOA full-time. I politely declined again. I'm not here to lead, I said, just to make sure no one else tries to rule. Still, I kept my seat on the Oversight Council, just in case. Because peace doesn't maintain itself. It needs guardians, quiet ones, invisible ones, people willing to hold the line not with threats or citations, but with integrity and vigilance, the kind of people who don't need clipboards to command respect. I took one last look at the sky, that night clear, wide, and free, and I knew, without a doubt, that this place was finally what I'd hoped for the day I arrived. Home, secured, protected, balanced, and if anyone ever tried to change that again, well, they'd have to get through the lock.